March 4, 2024, Miami International Airport. A 62-year-old man waits at gate D7, clutching a small gift bag and his passport. He tells the gate agent it's his first time flying that far, that he's going to meet someone special, someone he says changed his life. To everyone else, he looks like any other traveler chasing a little happiness. 8 days later, halfway across the world, that same passport will help police identify what's left of him. Between that gate in Florida and a roadside in Manila lies a story that began with a message typed on a phone. "Hi, handsome." It was meant to be the start of a love story. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about how easily trust can be bought, and how quickly it can be used against you. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Harold Whitman was born on April 6, 1961 in Tampa, Florida, to a working-class family that valued hard work more than words. His father, Charles, spent his life in overalls and grease, running a small auto repair shop that smelled of burnt oil and sweat. He wasn't cruel, but he was distant, the kind of man who measured love in how hard he worked, not in how often he spoke. His mother, Elaine, was the opposite. Soft hands, tired eyes, and a quiet strength that made their small home feel safe. She battled health problems most of Harold's childhood, but never let him see her pain. To her, Harold was special, gentle, bookish, too sensitive for his own good. She'd tell him, "Don't harden, Harold. The world already has enough men pretending they don't feel." Harold listened, but the world had other lessons. By 10, he had learned how to disappear in plain sight. He wasn't athletic, wasn't loud, and didn't care for trouble. Numbers became his secret language. Teachers noticed his gift for solving equations faster than anyone else. In math, he found order. No shouting, no confusion, just rules that stayed true. He'd sit in his room late at night, pencil in hand, filling notebooks with figures while his parents argued about bills in the next room. Numbers, he said once, were the only thing that didn't break when you touched them. In 1985, when Harold was 24, life dealt him a blow that he never truly recovered from. His mother collapsed in their kitchen one humid afternoon and was gone before the ambulance arrived. The house never sounded the same after that. His father, who had always spoken little, now spoke even less. Harold stood by her coffin, numb, and when the priest asked if anyone wanted to share words, he just shook his head. That moment hardened something in him. Instead of grief, he chose control. Within a month, he poured his energy into finishing college and securing a job in finance. Work, he told himself, keeps your hands busy when your heart has nothing left to hold. By 1989, Harold had climbed to a stable position at a local bank. He was disciplined, meticulous, the employee everyone trusted with details others ignored. The bank became his second home, his spreadsheets, his family. But outside those walls, he was a man living half a life. His co-workers would invite him to barbecues and social events, but he always declined politely. He wasn't unfriendly, just private. Tampa in the 1980s wasn't kind to men like Harold. He knew early he was gay, but back then, being honest about it came with consequences. He chose silence, believing it was safer to live carefully than truthfully. He tried dating a few times, quietly, meeting men through whispers of community gatherings. One brief relationship with a teacher named Robert lasted nearly 2 years, ending not in anger, but exhaustion. Robert wanted to live openly. Harold wasn't ready to risk everything he had built. "You can't keep pretending forever," Robert told him one night during an argument. Harold's only reply was, "I'm not pretending. I'm protecting." That was 1993. They never spoke again. Harold buried the pain under longer work hours and new clients. He told his friends he was married once, to his job. Fast forward to 2018. After 3 decades in finance, Harold retired early at 57, with a modest pension, a healthy savings account, and no one to share it with. He sold his father's old house and bought a small condo overlooking Clearwater Beach. Every morning followed the same pattern: coffee, market news, a solitary walk along the sand. To strangers, he looked content, a man who had done well for himself. To those who knew him, Harold was kind, generous, and reliable. Generous to a fault, his friend Dennis would later say. He donated to charities quietly, lent money to neighbors who never paid him back, and remembered every birthday. Yet, when he returned home each evening, his phone stayed silent. No texts, no calls. Over the next few years, that silence became unbearable. Technology promised connection, so Harold turned to it, cautiously at first. He joined a few dating apps tailored to older men, using a picture that made him look approachable but modest. His bio read simply, "Looking for companionship and honest conversation. I love the ocean and believe kindness still matters." Messages trickled in. Some were polite, others crude, a few genuine. For the first time in years, Harold laughed while reading his phone. That small joy, feeling wanted, became addictive. But online affection has its shadows. One man, calling himself Daniel, claimed to be from Malaysia. He was sweet, attentive, and said all the right things. They talked daily for weeks until Daniel began hinting at financial trouble, a broken phone, a sick cousin. Harold hesitated, then sent $200 through a transfer app. It wasn't the money that hurt, it was the silence that followed. Daniel vanished overnight. The realization hit Harold hard, not because he'd been tricked, but because he'd let himself hope. He told no one about it. When his neighbor asked how things were going, Harold smiled and said, "Same old, same old." But inside, something shifted. The embarrassment didn't teach him to stop. It taught him to hide it better. Loneliness, after all, doesn't leave when you ignore it. It only changes shape. By early 2023, Harold's phone had become both his comfort and his curse. His friends started noticing changes. He was dressing sharper, eating out alone more often, and carrying a nervous excitement that felt new. When Dennis asked him what was different, Harold grinned and said, "I've been talking to someone special." Dennis raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Local?" Harold chuckled softly. "No, he's from the Philippines. You wouldn't believe how kind he is." That man was Arnel Santos, 27 years old, charming, affectionate, and everything Harold thought he'd stopped deserving. Arnel called him Old Soul, and Harold said, "Maybe, but you make me feel young again." Their chats stretched late into the night, video calls filled with laughter and promises. Friends noticed his confidence return. Harold started saying things like, "You know, life isn't over at 62. He told Dennis, "I'm planning a trip, just to see him in person. I think he might be the one." It would be the first time Harold left the country. The decision thrilled him and scared him in equal measure. But love, or what looked like it, made him fearless. To him, Arnel wasn't just a man. He was redemption. A chance to live out the part of himself he'd hidden for decades. Harold didn't know that behind the warmth of those messages, there was something calculated. He didn't know that the smile on the other side of the screen had fooled others before him. Before we continue with what happened next, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. Not just for this story, but to remind others how easily loneliness can disguise itself as love. Arnel Santos was born on May 12, 1996, in the crowded district of Guadalupe, Cebu, a place where houses leaned against each other like exhausted neighbors, and where childhood ended the moment you realized no one was coming to help. His mother, Maritz, worked overseas as a domestic helper in Saudi Arabia, sending home barely enough to keep the lights on. His father had disappeared before Arnel learned to spell his name. His grandmother raised him with strict discipline and empty pockets. From a young age, he learned that the world didn't hand out kindness. You had to trade something for it. While other boys played basketball barefoot in the street, Arnel was the one sitting by the Sari Sari store, watching tourists with wallets thicker than his entire household's income for the month. By 13, he had mastered the art of pretending, smiling when he was hungry, nodding when adults lectured him about hard work. In school, teachers said he was bright but easily distracted. His classmates called him mobilidad, street smart. He wasn't bookish, but he understood people. How they looked when they lied, when they wanted something, when they could be persuaded. He discovered that attention could be a currency. A few compliments, a clever smile, and doors opened. In a neighborhood where survival depended on quick thinking, Arnell realized he could charm his way into almost anything. When his mother's remittances began arriving late, Arnell dropped out of high school at 16. He told his grandmother he'd find work. What he found instead were internet cafes, long rows of computers glowing blue through the night, filled with teenagers chatting, gaming, and pretending to be people they weren't. That's where he met a small group of older teens who called themselves the Crew. They taught him things that weren't written in school books: how to fake an accent, how to sound American, how to use charm to make a stranger trust you online. One of them told him, "If you make them believe you care, they'll give you anything." Arnell listened, learned fast, and practiced harder. His first scam was clumsy. He posed as a young woman on Facebook, messaging a middle-aged Australian man. For 2 weeks, they exchanged sweet messages and late-night chats. The man sent him 10,000 pesos for school. Arnell split the money with his crew and spent his share on sneakers and a new phone. The adrenaline of that first success stayed with him. In a place where most people worked months for that kind of money, he'd earned it in days with nothing but words. That was his first turning point, the moment he realized that affection could be manufactured and monetized. From then on, compassion became a performance, and sincerity a skill. Through his late teens, Arnell became a fixture in the cyber cafes. He stopped caring about shame. He cared only about results. He adopted multiple personas: a caring nurse, a shy student, a lonely soul. His chats followed a pattern: warmth, attention, small talk, and then the ask. When someone sent money, he'd reward them with affection. When they stopped, he'd vanish. His peers admired him. "You could sell rain to the ocean," one of them joked. He liked the respect it brought, the power of control. In a life that had offered him none, he was now the one holding the strings. By his 20s, Arnell had expanded his game beyond Facebook. He joined global dating platforms where lonely people sought comfort, and every message felt like an audition. He'd stay awake all night, his face lit by the glow of a monitor, cycling between profiles and conversations. The lies multiplied. Sometimes he was a 25-year-old student in Manila, sometimes a nurse in Singapore. To his targets, he was the perfect listener. To himself, he was just collecting data, details he could weaponize later. He wasn't proud of it, but pride didn't feed him. Then came 2020, the pandemic. Lockdowns crushed the little economy his neighborhood depended on. Tourism disappeared, jobs vanished, and hunger returned. Arnell tried honest work first, delivering food by bicycle, but it barely covered rent. One night, while scrolling through old chats, he noticed something. His most responsive victims were older men, often from Western countries, retirees, widowers, or those too shy to date in person. They were polite, generous, and predictable. Many were gay or bisexual, seeking companionship they couldn't find locally. That realization became his second turning point. He restructured everything. He created new accounts, used younger photos, and targeted specific platforms for older gay men looking for friendship. He learned how to sound caring without overdoing it, a balance that made him seem genuine. He built spreadsheets of his targets: names, ages, countries, income estimates, emotional triggers. His friends laughed at how methodical he was. Arnell called it business. When asked if he ever felt guilty, he replied, "You can't steal what they give willingly." During those years, he developed what he called his dual life. By day, he was the charming young man everyone liked, polite to neighbors, helpful at the local store, the kind who smiled at strangers. By night, he was someone else entirely. In his small rented room, he sat with headphones on, pretending to care about men he'd never meet. On his laptop, he kept folders labeled clients. Each one contained screenshots, personal details, and notes on how far they could be pushed before suspicion arose. He treated love like logistics, a transaction from need to profit. Friends noticed his change. He wore better clothes, bought a motorbike, and moved into a slightly nicer apartment. When asked how he could afford it, he'd shrug and say, "Online job." The truth was darker, but simpler. He had perfected his act to the point where it no longer felt like acting. The guilt that had once flickered in his eyes was gone. He convinced himself he wasn't hurting anyone, just giving them the fantasy they paid for. It was around mid-2023 when his path crossed with Harold Whitman's. The algorithm did the introduction. Harold's profile appeared on one of the sites Arnell frequented, respectful, sincere, and easy to read. His bio mentioned retirement, Florida, and a love for travel. To Arnell, it looked like an opportunity. He sent the first message that evening. "Hi, handsome. I like your smile." He'd sent that line 1,000 times before, but something about this one felt promising. Harold replied within minutes, polite but eager, saying, "Well, thank you. I wasn't sure anyone would even notice me on here." From that exchange, Arnell saw the opening he needed. He knew Harold's type: lonely, cautious, and craving connection. Their messages moved quickly from polite chats to nightly video calls. Arnell used every trick he'd learned: gentle humor, attentive listening, soft reassurances. When Harold laughed, Arnell smiled wider. When Harold hesitated, he sent another compliment. Behind the camera, Arnell kept notes. Harold liked mornings by the ocean, black coffee, and being called Sir. In one chat from July 2023, Harold typed, "I feel like I've known you my whole life." Arnell responded, "Maybe we were meant to find each other. I don't believe in accidents." He said it casually, knowing exactly how it would sound to a man who'd spent years feeling unseen. Their bond deepened quickly. Within weeks, Harold began transferring small amounts of money for Arnell's rent or to help his sick grandmother. Arnell thanked him profusely, voice trembling as if he were embarrassed by the gesture. He'd learned that gratitude was the most effective bait. The more Harold gave, the more Arnell praised his kindness. He called him my angel, my lucky charm, the one who brought light into my life. Yet off camera, Arnell laughed about it with his crew. He told them, "This one's good, disciplined, sentimental, careful, but I can work him." He never said Harold's name, just the American. The others teased him, calling him the Professor, for how systematically he handled his victims. But as months passed, something shifted in Arnell too. For the first time, one of his marks wasn't just sending money, he was sending care. Harold would ask about his day, about his dreams, about what he wanted beyond money. "You could go to college," Harold once told him. "You're smarter than you think." It wasn't manipulation. Harold meant it. And for a few seconds during those conversations, Arnell almost believed he could be the person Harold imagined him to be. Still, greed won. Arnell wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for control. When Harold mentioned possibly visiting, Arnell hesitated for a few days before saying yes. It was the perfect setup, a chance to seal what he called his biggest project yet. His friends warned him that foreigners could be dangerous, that scams turned messy when done in person. Arnell replied, "I know what I'm doing. I make them love me first. That's the trick." By November 2023, their plans were set. Harold had booked his flight. Arnell sent photos of beaches, sunsets, and his apartment, though the pictures were taken from Google. The messages grew more emotional. Harold said, "I'm counting the days." Arnell replied, "So am I, love. I can't wait to hold you." What Harold saw as a promise was, for Arnell, a countdown. The algorithm had matched a lonely retiree looking for one last chance at happiness with a young man who saw affection as a business model. One wanted love, the other wanted leverage. And in December, their two worlds would finally meet, one stepping off a plane full of hope, the other waiting with practiced charm and hidden intentions. The first message came on a quiet evening. In July 2023, Harold was sitting in his Florida condo, laptop open, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. He'd just finished reading an article about retirement loneliness when the notification pinged. The message was short, almost shy. "Hi, handsome. You have a kind face." The profile name read Arnel, 27, from Cebu City, Philippines. Harold smiled, half amused, half flattered. He wasn't used to being called handsome anymore. He replied, "Well, thank you, young man. You just made an old guy's day." That was how it started. No grand moment, no premonition. Just two strangers and a few lines of text that would change everything. Over the following days, their chats grew steady and comfortable. Arnel had a softness to his words that Harold found refreshing. He called Harold Sir at first, polite and careful, but soon it became Harold, then love. They talked about everything: favorite foods, weather differences, small details about daily life. Harold spoke about the Gulf Coast sunsets he'd grown up watching, while Arnel described the noise of Cebu's city streets, tricycles humming past at all hours, and the smell of fried bananas from the corner stall. For Harold, it felt like discovering color after years of living in grayscale. He'd message first thing in the morning, wait for replies before sleeping, and check his phone during coffee breaks like a teenager again. Their first video call happened a week later. Harold had been nervous. He hadn't been on camera in years. When Arnel's face appeared, smiling under the yellow light of a small room, Harold chuckled and said, "Well, you're real." Arnel laughed. "Of course I am. Did you think I was a robot?" It became a running joke between them. Every night after that, Harold poured himself a glass of wine, sat by his window, and called. Sometimes they talked for an hour, sometimes 3. Arnel listened to him with the kind of attention Harold hadn't felt in decades. He'd lean forward and say softly, "You must have been so handsome when you were young." Harold would laugh and answer, "You make it sound like I'm ancient." As the nights passed, Arnel began learning Harold's rhythm, the loneliness that crept in around 8 p.m., the way his voice softened after 2 glasses of wine, the pauses that came when he spoke about his past. He asked about Harold's marriage, his family, his regrets. Harold told him the truth, that he'd spent most of his life hiding who he was, that love had always felt like something meant for other people. Arnel responded gently, "You're just waiting for the right person to love you the right way." That line stayed with Harold long after the call ended. Weeks turned into months, and by September, their relationship had become the highlight of Harold's routine. He bought a better webcam, started grooming more often, even lost a bit of weight. His friends noticed. Dennis, his neighbor, once joked, "You're glowing lately, Harold. What's her name?" Harold smiled awkwardly and said, "Not her. His." Dennis raised his eyebrows. "Oh, well, I'm happy for you, man. Just be careful, all right?" Harold waved it off. "He's not like that. He's different." What Harold didn't know was that Arnel had mastered the art of being different. Every compliment, every question, every pause was calculated to build attachment. His phone was filled with notes about Harold's likes and insecurities. Loves sincerity, hates pity, trusts easily. He used those details like a script, knowing exactly what to say when Harold hesitated. And when Harold began to ask about visiting, Arnel said the line he always used, "I wish I could love, but money's tight. I'm behind on my rent." It wasn't a demand, just a quiet confession. It made Harold want to help. At first, he sent $200 through PayPal. Arnel protested. "You don't have to." Harold insisted, "I want to. You're working hard." The gratitude that followed felt genuine. "Thank you, Harold. No one's ever cared like this." Then came small requests: $50 for data, $80 for groceries, $100, just until payday. Each time, Arnel sent photos, grocery bags, a clean apartment, a receipt, proof that he was responsible. What Harold didn't see were the edited timestamps, or that the same photos had been used for other victims months earlier. By November, the connection between them felt deeper than friendship. Harold began referring to Arnel as his partner. They celebrated his birthday together over video chat. Harold had a cupcake with a candle, and Arnell sang softly from his room in Cebu. It was simple but sincere, or so it seemed. When Harold's friends asked about the relationship, he defended it fiercely. "He's the only one who listens," he said. "He doesn't judge me for being old or gay. He just sees me." The turning point came in December. Arnell mentioned that his apartment building was undergoing repairs and that his landlord demanded 3 months' rent in advance. Harold, without hesitation, offered to help. "How much?" he asked. Arnell paused just long enough to sound reluctant. "It's around $3,000, but please don't worry. I'll figure it out." Harold insisted. He transferred the money that same night. When Dennis later found out, he tried to warn him. "Harold, you can't just send that kind of money to someone you haven't met." Harold chuckled, sipping his wine. "You don't understand. He's not using me. He cares." After the transfer, Arnell's tone changed subtly. He started mentioning the future more. Their plans, their life together, the idea of Harold visiting soon. One night, after hours of small talk and laughter, Arnell looked into the camera and said, "I wish you were here, love." Harold smiled. "Maybe someday." Arnell shook his head. "No, I mean it. Come to me. I want to hold you. We've waited long enough." Those words played on a loop in Harold's head for days. He checked flight prices that same week, looking at tickets to Manila. He texted Arnell, "What if I really did come?" Arnell replied almost immediately, "Then I'd finally be happy." It was the final push Harold needed. On December 27, 2023, he booked his flight. One way. He told his friends he'd be gone for 2 weeks, maybe longer. He packed light, added a few gifts for Arnell in his luggage, and left his condo in perfect order. As he locked the door, Dennis called out, "You sure about this, man?" Harold smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." What he didn't realize was that while he was preparing for the happiest trip of his life, Arnell was preparing for something else entirely. Behind the charm and laughter was a man who had already mapped out his next move. The algorithm had done its job, pairing love with danger and hope with deception. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far into the story, type, "I'm still here." Let's see who's following Harold's journey as we uncover what really awaited him on the other side of that flight. December 2nd, 2023, 8:17 p.m., Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Manila. After nearly 20 hours in transit from Tampa to Los Angeles, then to Manila, Harold Whitman stepped off the plane gripping a small gift bag and his passport like they were extensions of his heartbeat. He wore a light blue button-down shirt, pressed and tucked, his gray hair neatly combed back, the kind of care that hinted at how much this meeting meant. For a man who'd spent most of his life in routines, every step through that airport felt like a second chance. He looked around nervously, scanning faces, until he saw him, Arnell, standing near the exit, holding a bouquet of red roses and smiling like every promise he'd ever made was finally real. Witnesses later said they looked genuinely happy, like two people who had been waiting for this moment their whole lives. Harold waved, and Arnell ran toward him, wrapping his arms around him tightly. For the first time, Harold felt what he'd only imagined through a screen: warmth. The city outside the terminal was alive in ways Harold had never seen. Jeepneys roared past, painted in wild colors, vendors shouted in Tagalog, and the smell of grilled food lingered in the humid air. He laughed at how chaotic it all felt. Arnell noticed and said, "Welcome to the Philippines, love. It's messy, but it's home." Harold replied, "If you're here, it's perfect." They rode through the city in a taxi, windows down, Arnell's hand occasionally brushing his. Harold filmed everything: street performers, bright billboards, even the sky changing color as rain clouds drifted past. In his videos, his voice shook slightly when he said, "This is unbelievable. I never thought I'd do something like this." The first few days felt like a dream come true. They visited the Mall of Asia, ate Halo in plastic cups, took selfies at Manila Bay during sunset. Arnell introduced him to two friends who spoke to Harold politely but exchanged looks behind his back that he didn't notice. In the apartment Arnell had rented, Harold felt comfortable. It wasn't luxury, but it was theirs. He unpacked his clothes, placed a photo of his late mother on the bedside table, and said, "She'd like you, Arnell. She always wanted me to be happy." Arnell smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "Then I'll do my best to make her proud." But love stories often shift in silence, not in arguments. Around the fifth night, Harold started to notice things that didn't make sense. Arnell was distracted, answering calls in another room. When Harold asked who it was, Arnell would shrug it off. "Just a friend," he'd say. New faces began showing up late at night, men Harold hadn't met before. One carried boxes inside, another came to borrow money. Harold tried not to overthink it. He told himself cultural differences explained the late-night visitors, that Arnell was just generous like he'd always seemed. But the unease grew. On December 8th, Harold checked his phone while Arnell was in the shower. A bank alert flashed, a $5,000 withdrawal he hadn't authorized. His stomach tightened. He went to his bag, found his debit card missing, then heard the water shut off. Arnell stepped out, towel around his waist, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Harold held up the phone and said, "What is this, Arnell? Did you use my card?" The smile faded. Arnell looked away and said quietly, "You said we share everything. I just needed it. I was going to pay you back." Harold's voice cracked. "You took my money without asking me." Arnell snapped, "I'm not your servant, Harold. You think because you're American you own me?" The argument escalated quickly. Neighbors later told investigators they heard shouting, then the sound of furniture scraping the floor. One woman recalled a voice yelling, "Don't touch me!" followed by silence. When she knocked to check if everything was okay, no one answered. Arnell opened the door briefly, smiled nervously, and said, "Just a misunderstanding." Then he closed it again. The next morning, the apartment windows stayed covered. Harold didn't come out for breakfast, and Arnell was seen leaving with a suitcase just after 9 a.m., carrying what looked like cleaning supplies. The building caretaker, curious, asked where Harold was. Arnell replied, "He went to Cebu for a few days." It didn't make sense, but no one questioned it. Foreigners came and went often. By December 10th, the smell began. Subtle at first, then strong enough for the neighbors to notice. Someone joked it was spoiled food. Another said maybe a dead animal. Still, no one checked. Now think about this. What would you have done if you were Harold that night? Would you have confronted someone you loved? Someone who made you believe your life still had color? Or would you have walked away quietly? Would love have blinded you to the danger? Or would you have seen it coming? December 11th, 2023, 6:42 a.m., Pasay City, Manila. A group of residents walking their dogs along a narrow roadside near F.B. Harrison Street stopped when one of them caught a foul smell drifting from a pile of trash. At first, they assumed it was spoiled food, but when one man kicked a black garbage sack to the side, a heavy thud followed. Too solid, too strange. The bag had split slightly from one corner, revealing something no one expected to see on a quiet Monday morning: a human leg. Police arrived within minutes, sealing off the area as curious neighbors gathered behind yellow tape. Inside the torn bag were the dismembered remains of a man, carefully wrapped and bound with duct tape. No wallet, no phone, no identification. But something about the cut of the clothes and the shoes still on one foot told detectives this wasn't a local street crime. By afternoon, forensic teams from the Philippine National Police began processing the scene. The remains were transported to the Manila Police District Crime Laboratory. The body had been severed cleanly at the torso, each cut deliberate, each layer of clothing carefully folded to conceal identity. Investigators said the dismemberment wasn't done by a professional, but by someone familiar enough with anatomy to know how to separate joints efficiently. It took 3 kitchen knives and a butcher's cleaver, all later found in a sink inside a nearby apartment. Blood residue and cleaning agents were detected through luminol. Hours later, the U.S. Embassy confirmed the worst. Dental records and a partial fingerprint matched the identity of the victim. Harold Whitman, 62 years old, an African-American retiree from Florida, who had entered the country on a tourist visa just 9 days earlier. His arrival record showed he had listed a local address belonging to a man named Arnel Santos, 27, who lived less than a mile from where the garbage bag was found. Detectives immediately recognized a pattern. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It had traces of a romance scam ending in violence. Neighbors in Arnel's building recalled hearing loud arguing 2 nights before the discovery. One woman on the second floor told police they were shouting, like something about money. Then there was a loud crash, then nothing. Another neighbor described seeing Arnel leaving around 3 a.m., dragging a large box wrapped in a bedsheet toward the back gate. When asked if she found it odd, she said, "He told me it was old furniture. I didn't think much of it." That box would later be linked to Harold's remains. Inside the apartment, investigators found a grim scene. Blood splatters under a newly mopped floor, cleaning fluid scattered near the sink, and signs of a struggle. An overturned chair, a cracked wine glass, and Harold's open passport on the table beside a half-packed suitcase. The apartment smelled of bleach and perfume, a combination that told investigators someone had tried to erase evidence, but failed. The autopsy later confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of the skull as the cause of death before dismemberment. Detectives began piecing the timeline together. Harold had arrived in Manila on December 2nd, meeting Arnel at the airport with flowers and wide smiles. The two were last seen together on December 8th, when a Grab food delivery driver dropped off dinner at their unit. The driver later told authorities, "The older guy looked worried. The younger one was on the phone, speaking in Tagalog, not smiling." Bank records showed that within hours of that visit, Harold's account had multiple unauthorized withdrawals, totaling nearly $5,000. Investigators determined these were done at several ATMs across Manila using Harold's card. The withdrawals stopped the same night the shouting began. Detective Maria de la Peña, leading the case, told reporters, "The evidence shows intent. The suspect didn't just steal. He manipulated, he planned, and when confronted, he killed." When questioned by the media if this was connected to an online romance scam, she nodded. "We've seen this pattern before. Older foreign men, promises of love, money transfers, then disappearance." Forensics later revealed something chilling. Inside the trash bag, the body had been wrapped in layers of bed sheets, the same pattern as those found in Arnel's apartment. Blood spatter on the wall matched Harold's DNA. The knives used were missing their handles, but fragments of fingerprints still clung to the metal. On the bed, investigators found Harold's phone case, but not the phone itself. Text messages recovered from cloud backup painted a heartbreaking final exchange. At 10:23 p.m. on December 8th, Harold had written, "We need to talk. I noticed money gone from my account." Arnel replied minutes later, "You think I'd steal from you? After everything I gave you?" Harold's final message read, "I trusted you." He was never seen alive again. The crime shocked both nations. For weeks, newspapers in Manila and Florida carried the same photo. Harold, smiling on a beach just days before his death. In the Philippines, it reignited conversations about online fraud and predatory relationships targeting foreign retirees. U.S. officials coordinated with local authorities to track Arnel's movements. CCTV from the building's lobby showed him leaving with a large box and returning an hour later wearing different clothes. The timestamp, 3:07 a.m., December 9th, confirmed the time of disposal. Forensic pathologists found small fibers from the apartment's rug stuck to the tape sealing the bag, confirming it was packaged there. Traces of detergent on Harold's skin suggested his killer had attempted to wash away evidence. Investigators also found remnants of burnt documents behind the building, likely bank receipts. Detective De La Peña said, "He wanted to erase him, not just kill him. But you can't erase a digital trail." By December 13th, the National Bureau of Investigation and the FBI's Manila Legal Attaché Office joined the probe. They began cross-referencing Arnel's known dating profiles. Within days, they discovered over 24 fake accounts, all under different names, all targeting older men from the United States, Canada, and Australia. Some victims had already reported being scammed by a man matching Arnel's photo months before Harold's murder. But Harold was the first who had actually traveled to meet him in person. Detectives later described the moment they reviewed the CCTV footage in full. One investigator said, "He looked calm. He wasn't rushing. He dragged the box like he'd done it before." What unsettled them most was how ordinary Arnell looked, a man smiling at neighbors, exchanging small talk, carrying a secret too heavy to imagine. When asked what stayed with her most, Detective De La Peña said, "He went halfway across the world for love and ended up in halves." Her voice broke slightly before she added, "This case isn't just about murder, it's about manipulation and the price of trust." That same week, news spread online. People flooded comment sections with disbelief, warning others about long-distance relationships and romance scams. Harold's friends in Florida organized a small vigil by Clearwater Beach. His closest friend, Dennis, stood by the water and said, "He thought love would make him whole again. He didn't know he was walking straight into a trap." It was a tragic story, but far from over. Because while Harold's remains lay in a Manila morgue awaiting repatriation, Arnell was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, leaving behind only his digital footprints, the same trails he once used to lure his victims. If you're still watching, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story, not for entertainment, but to protect someone you love. There are people right now scrolling through their phones, trusting strangers with their hearts and their lives. In the next chapter, investigators begin a relentless chase across islands, and what they uncover about Arnell's hidden past will change everything we thought we knew about him. December 14th, 2023, 10:30 a.m. Inside the Cybercrime Division of the Philippine National Police, investigators began what they called a digital autopsy. Harold Whitman's phone had been wiped clean, but his iCloud backups told a different story. Detectives sifted through hours of chat logs, transaction screenshots, and video call timestamps. What they found wasn't random. It was a roadmap of deceit. Over 4 months, Harold had made 14 separate transfers to Arnell Santos, totaling just over $27,000. Some were small, labeled for groceries or data bill, but others were more deliberate. $3,000 for apartment repairs, $1,200 for flight tickets, $5,000 for family emergency. Each transfer was followed by a flood of affectionate messages from Arnell. "You're my angel. You save me every time. I don't know what I'd do without you." What struck investigators most was the consistency. The timing, the phrasing, the rhythm of manipulation. It was the same pattern found in dozens of other romance scam cases across the country. Detective Maria De La Peña ordered a full data trace. Within 48 hours, her team connected Arnell's phone number to 6 different social media profiles, each using a different name: Alex Cruz, Jomar Lee, Carlito26, Hearthealer99, and Jay from Cebu. The profile photos varied slightly, but the same smile appeared in each one. When investigators reverse-searched one of the photos, it led to a startling revelation. The same image, cropped, filtered, and renamed, had been used in 3 earlier police reports involving missing foreign nationals. One was a Canadian retiree last seen in Cebu in 2019. Another, a British expat who vanished after arriving in Davao in 2021. And the third, an Australian engineer who had transferred money to a boyfriend before his death was ruled accidental. Each case, investigators realized, led back to the same digital fingerprints, the same IP address cluster used by Arnell's devices. This discovery shifted the investigation entirely. It was no longer just about Harold. It was about a pattern, a cycle of exploitation that had likely claimed multiple victims. Detectives reached out to the National Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Unit and requested archived logs from dating platforms known for foreign local relationships. What they found was chilling. Arnell wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a loosely connected group of online scammers who shared tactics, victim lists, and fake identities through encrypted chat rooms. Within that network, Arnell's reputation stood out. Other members referred to him as the closer. One chat transcript from early 2022 read, "If Arnell talks to your target, you'll get money in a week. He's that good." Investigators began interviewing low-level members of the group who had been previously arrested in separate cybercrime cases. One man from Cebu, already serving time for online fraud, told officers, "We learned from him. Arnel was smooth. He didn't rush people. He made them believe they were saving him. He always said, 'Don't ask for money. Make them offer it.'" When asked if he thought Arnel was capable of killing, the man hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe not before. But after Harold, I think he crossed a line he couldn't come back from." Meanwhile, in the U.S., the FBI's legal attaché office in Manila began comparing records of missing American citizens in Southeast Asia. They discovered at least 2 prior complaints made to the U.S. Embassy in the past 3 years from men describing a young Filipino named Arnel, who sounded charming but became aggressive after money ran out. Both victims had managed to leave the country before being harmed, but their cases were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. That would soon change when one man, Mark Peters, a 58-year-old tourist from California, contacted the embassy after reading about Harold's murder online. His message to investigators was simple. "That's him. That's the same guy who stole from me. And I'm lucky to still be alive." Mark arrived in Manila in February 2023 after months of chatting with Arnel online. The story was identical, a warm friendship that turned romantic, a string of excuses about rent and illness, and escalating emotional control. Mark told detectives, "He made me feel like I mattered. He'd say, 'You're not like the others. You actually care about me.' Then one day I realized $9,000 was gone. My bank called me, and when I confronted him, he looked me dead in the eye and said, 'You think you can just leave me after everything?'" According to Mark's sworn statement, Arnel grew violent. He threw a mug against the wall and said if I ever told anyone, I'd regret it. I left the next morning. I didn't even check out of the hotel. I just ran. Mark's testimony became the turning point of the case. His description of Arnel's voice, movements, and mannerisms matched precisely with what detectives saw on surveillance footage. He identified the same small tattoo on Arnel's left wrist that appeared in a video still from December 9th, the night Harold vanished. More importantly, Mark's bank records showed remittances to the same Cebu-based account Arnel had used for Harold's transfers. With Mark's cooperation, investigators gained access to old chat logs where Arnel had used similar lines. "My Wi-Fi got cut. My landlord is threatening me. If you really love me, you'll help." The language mirrored Harold's messages word for word. Cyber analysts dug deeper, reconstructing Arnel's online behavior over the past 5 years. They discovered that he used multiple VPNs to mask his location but occasionally slipped, logging in from cafes around Cebu City. Receipts from those shops matched timestamps on Harold's earlier video calls. It was proof that Arnel had been in control of the deception from the start. One officer put it bluntly. Every smile, every word, every "I love you" was part of the setup. He didn't just take their money, he took their peace. For detectives, the case became personal. They had seen scammers before, but none who had crossed from fraud to murder. As evidence mounted, the FBI liaison in Manila confirmed that Arnel's activities had extended beyond the Philippines. Several of his victims lived in the U.S., and under international law, he could face charges both abroad and domestically. The search for him intensified. But while authorities followed leads across provinces, a question began echoing through the investigation rooms. How many more men had trusted this same face, this same voice, and simply disappeared? Every recovered message, every money transfer revealed another ghost in the data. People who had believed they were loved, only to be erased by someone they never truly knew. Before we continue, take a moment to think. How well do we really know the people behind our screens? If you're still with us, type "I'm still here" in the comments. In the next chapter, the hunt begins, and what police uncover about Arnel's escape will expose a trail darker and wider than anyone imagined. December 20th, 2023, 11 days after the discovery of Harold Whitman's remains. The sun had barely risen over Manila when detectives received confirmation that Arnel Santos had boarded a southbound ferry under a false name. The manifest listed him as Joseph L. Destination, Leyte. By the time police traced the ticket purchase, the ferry had already left the pier. Officers rushed to coordinate with port authorities in Tacloban, but Arnel had a 6-hour head start and a plan built on experience. For years, he had studied escape routes just as carefully as he studied people. He knew when ferries were checked, which terminals had fewer cameras, and how to blend in. Witnesses later recalled a young man with a baseball cap and a rolling suitcase, calm and polite, asking where he could get a cheap room near the terminal. He didn't look like someone running from a murder. He looked like someone starting fresh. Over the next several days, the trail shifted from island to island. Local police in Leyte confirmed Arnel rented a room under another alias at a low-cost boarding house in the town of Palo. The landlady remembered him vividly. He was quiet, always on his phone. He'd sit in the corner at night, laughing softly like he was talking to someone in love. When investigators examined the room after he left, they found an empty SIM card wrapper and a note scribbled on hotel stationery. "Meet me in Cebu soon. I'll bring you to paradise." That was dated December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. Authorities suspected he was already building new online identities and targeting his next victims while evading capture. On December 27th, police in Tacloban conducted a pre-dawn raid on a small apartment complex after receiving a tip from a food delivery driver, who claimed to have recognized Arnel's face from the news. The tension was high. Officers kicked open the door, shouting commands, only to find an elderly couple sitting at their breakfast table. The information had been wrong. By the time the real lead came in, security footage showing Arnel boarding another ferry heading for Cebu. He was already 200 miles away. Detective Maria de la Peña told reporters later, "He was always one step ahead. It was like chasing smoke across water." Back in Manila, the cybercrime unit had been working quietly, following Arnel's digital footprints. They knew he couldn't resist staying online. Love was his bait, and the internet was his hunting ground. Using Harold's case as a baseline, they set up a tracker on multiple dating platforms tied to Arnel's previous usernames and images. For days, nothing appeared. Then, on January 4th, 2024, one of the flagged photos, the same smiling face Harold had fallen for, resurfaced on a new account under the name J from Asia. The location pinged from a public Wi-Fi network belonging to a hotel in Cebu City. The message on the profile read, "Looking for someone real. I believe in forever." Investigators moved fast. Local authorities were notified, and an undercover unit set up near the hotel that same night. At 12:47 a.m., they saw him, slim build, white shirt, cap pulled low, sitting in the hotel lobby, phone in hand, smiling faintly at his screen. When officers approached, he looked up once and froze. They said he didn't fight, didn't run, didn't even flinch. It was 1:14 a.m. when Arnel Santos was officially taken into custody. On his phone, 2 active chats were open. One with an American man from Nevada, another with a retiree in Canada. Both conversations ended with the same line, "You'll never regret trusting me." At the Cebu City precinct, detectives described his demeanor as emotionless. He asked for water, then sat silently for nearly 30 minutes before speaking. The first thing he said was, "You've been chasing me for nothing." Detective De La Peña leaned forward and asked, "Why did you kill Harold Whitman?" Arnel looked up, his voice calm and measured. "Kill?" he repeated. "He got angry. He hit me. I defended myself." When pressed about the dismemberment, he shrugged. "I panicked. But what difference does it make? He was already gone." His tone chilled the room. There was no remorse, no trace of fear, only irritation at being caught. Investigators confronted him with the evidence: the bank transfers, the CCTV footage, the messages recovered from his cloud backup. Arnel barely glanced at the photos. "They come here for love," he said finally. "I come for life. They have money. I have nothing. We both get what we want, until they stop paying." Detective Peña replied quietly, "And when will they stop paying?" He smiled faintly and said, "Then the story ends." That exchange would later become one of the most quoted lines in Filipino crime reporting, encapsulating the cold logic behind the scam that turned deadly. Meanwhile, officers from the U.S. Embassy arrived in Cebu to witness the interrogation. One agent recalled how unsettling it was. The way Arnell spoke as if discussing business, not murder. He even asked if the American government would pay for his lawyer, saying, "After all, it's their people who keep messaging me." When detectives showed him the dating app conversations found on his phone, including the ones he was having moments before his arrest, he laughed softly. "You see? They never stop coming." For the families of victims, those words were unbearable. In Florida, Harold's sister Denise told reporters, "He believed in kindness. He thought he could fix loneliness with love. I just hope that man never sees daylight again." In Cebu, locals gathered outside the police station, furious that someone from their community had turned trust into a weapon. By January 10, 2024, Arnell was officially charged with murder, theft, and multiple counts of cyber fraud. His capture ended a manhunt that had stretched across 3 islands, involved more than 30 officers, and exposed a criminal operation that blurred the line between affection and exploitation. Yet, even as investigators celebrated the arrest, they knew the case wasn't closed. The full extent of his crimes, the other missing foreigners, the unidentified bank accounts, the victims too ashamed to come forward, remained buried beneath layers of false identities and encrypted messages. And maybe that's what made Arnell so dangerous. He didn't need weapons. He used words, promises, and hope, the one thing everyone wants to believe in. Before we move on, I want to thank every one of you for being part of this story. Your support keeps these investigations alive, ensuring that victims like Harold are never forgotten. If you want to help us continue bringing these true stories to light, join our channel membership today. You'll unlock exclusive updates, behind-the-scenes reports, and more cases that reveal the truth hidden behind the screen. Because, as we've just seen, sometimes the most dangerous killers don't need to chase their victims. They just need them to fall in love. February 2024. Barely a month after his arrest, Arnell Santos sat in a cold detention cell in Cebu, staring at the concrete wall while the world outside began closing in. His capture had made headlines across both the Philippines and the United States. The FBI had now joined forces with the Philippine National Bureau of Investigation, NBI, to ensure no details slipped through the cracks. Digital forensic experts were flown in from Quantico, bringing advanced technology to recover deleted messages, encrypted photos, and cloud backups from Arnell's confiscated devices. Every chat, every transaction, every word he ever typed to Harold Whitman was being dissected line by line. One investigator told reporters, "It's like walking through his mind, a map of manipulation and lies." The pre-trial hearings began in March, and for the first time, the full scope of Arnell's double life came into view. Inside the courtroom of Regional Trial Court Branch 22, Cebu City, journalists filled every seat. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Prosecutor Leah Villanueva, opened the proceedings by showing the jury a digital timeline. Each date matched to a bank transfer, each transfer matched to a message of affection. "This," she said, pointing to a screen filled with screenshots, "isn't love. This is control." The FBI's digital forensic team presented irrefutable evidence: 14 wire transfers, voice recordings of Harold's video calls, and cloud logs that tracked Arnell's simultaneous conversations with 2 other American men during the same period. It was an airtight chain of digital breadcrumbs linking the suspect to both deception and death. Then came the moment that silenced the courtroom. Prosecutors played the final recording recovered from Harold's iCloud, a brief voice memo sent from the Manila airport on December 2, 2023, just hours after his arrival. On the screen, Harold's face appeared smiling and excited, saying, "I'm here, Arnell. I can't believe this is real." His voice cracked slightly as he laughed nervously, unaware that the man waiting for him at arrivals would later become his killer. As the video ended, several jurors wiped their eyes. Even the judge paused before continuing. The prosecutor said softly, "This was a man who crossed an ocean for love. He didn't know it would lead him here." Throughout the trial, Arnell sat still, wearing a crisp white shirt and expressionless face. He never looked at Harold's sister, Denise Whitman, who had flown from Florida to attend every session. She later said, "I wanted to see if he'd at least flinch when they showed my brother's body photos. He didn't blink once." The defense, led by attorney Rico Tan, attempted to soften the case. He told the court that Arnell had acted in panic after a heated argument, claiming Harold had become aggressive when confronted about money. "It was never meant to happen," the defense insisted. "My client lost control in a moment of fear." But prosecutors dismantled that argument piece by piece. They revealed a string of messages sent days before Harold's death in which Arnell discussed his plans with another contact. One read, "He's coming with cash. I'll handle him." Another said, "After this one, I'm done." It wasn't panic. It was premeditation. Digital forensic specialist agent Paul Kessler testified that the timestamps proved Arnell had accessed Harold's bank account from his own device hours before the murder. He told the court, "The transactions and conversations overlapped perfectly. He knew what he was doing every step of the way." The turning point came on June 18, 2024, when a surprise witness was called, a man identified as Miguel Reyes, Arnell's former boyfriend from Cebu. Nervous but determined, Miguel walked to the stand and faced his ex-partner. He told the court, "He used to brag about rich old fools online. He'd say, 'These men think they're saving me, but I'm saving myself.'" The courtroom stirred as he continued. "He once showed me a video of a man from Canada crying on camera, begging him not to leave. He laughed about it." When asked by the prosecutor if Arnell ever mentioned Harold by name, Miguel nodded. "Yes. He said the American was too kind to live." That statement cut through the room like a blade. Arnell's attorney objected furiously, but the damage was done. Public opinion had already shifted fully against the defendant. Even online, the hashtag #ShouperJusticeForHarold began trending across the Philippines and the U.S. as footage from the trial spread. Behind the scenes, U.S. Embassy representatives worked closely with Filipino prosecutors to ensure the case set a precedent, protecting other foreign victims of digital romance crimes. NBI Director Atareo Ramon Castro told the press, "This trial isn't just about one man. It's about a system that preys on the lonely and turns love into currency." By November 2024, after nearly 10 months of hearings, the prosecution rested its case. They had called 37 witnesses, produced hundreds of exhibits, and played over 60 minutes of recorded evidence. The defense presented only 2 witnesses, both former acquaintances of Arnell, who claimed he was gentle and easily scared. When Arnell took the stand in his own defense, his words sealed his fate. Asked by the judge if he had anything to say, he leaned forward and said quietly, "I didn't kill him for money. I killed him because he wanted to leave." On February 3, 2025, the verdict was read. The courtroom fell into complete silence. The judge spoke clearly, each word echoing through the chamber. The court finds the accused, Arnell Santos, guilty beyond reasonable doubt of the crime of murder and multiple counts of cyber fraud. He is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Arnell showed no reaction. He simply stared ahead, hands clasped, as if already somewhere else. But behind him, Harold's sister Denise broke down in tears. Through sobs, she whispered, "He just wanted to be loved." As reporters rushed to capture the moment, Detective Maria de la Peña, who had chased Arnell across islands for weeks, stepped outside the courthouse and faced the cameras. She said, "Justice doesn't bring him back, but maybe it stops the next Harold." And that's where this story leaves us. In a courtroom where a man's final wish for love became the evidence that condemned his killer. If you've followed this story until now, take a second to share it. Not for clicks, but for awareness. Because somewhere tonight, another lonely soul might be answering a message that begins with, "Hi, handsome," and ends in tragedy. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied, but the conversation it sparked was only beginning. Across the Philippines and the United States, Harold Whitman's story became more than a murder case. It became a mirror reflecting how easily hope can be turned into harm. The LGBTQ+ community in both countries spoke out almost immediately. Leaders urged people not to paint an entire community through the actions of one man, emphasizing that the danger wasn't about identity, but about deception. One Manila-based advocate, Luis Ortega, told the press, "Arnel's crime wasn't about love between men. It was about manipulation, greed, and the loneliness people prey on. We have to separate orientation from exploitation." Organizations launched awareness campaigns under hashtags like Love Safe Online and Verify Before You Trust, reminding users that affection over Wi-Fi can't replace accountability in real life. By February 2025, U.S. news outlets had picked up the story. The Washington Post ran the headline, "Love Scam Turns Lethal. Retired Americans Search for Connection Ends in Murder Abroad." The FBI's Cyber Division published a formal advisory warning American citizens about the growing risks of romance fraud networks, targeting older adults and retirees through dating apps. The advisory cited Harold's case by initials, noting that emotional manipulation can escalate to physical danger. The U.S. Embassy in Manila coordinated with local law enforcement to strengthen verification processes for citizens traveling to meet online partners. As one agent told reporters, "We can't police love, but we can educate it." Meanwhile, inside Cebu Provincial Jail, Arnel Santos adjusted to a new kind of silence. Gone were the constant pings of incoming messages, the late-night video calls, the digital charm that once paid his bills. In March 2025, prison officials intercepted a letter he'd written addressed to Harold's sister. In it, he claimed remorse, saying, "I never wanted it to go this far. I just wanted someone to see me." But investigators noticed something strange. The letter wasn't signed Arnel. It was signed J, one of his old online aliases. For detectives, it confirmed what they had always suspected. Even behind bars, Arnel couldn't separate truth from performance. One officer put it simply, "He doesn't know who he is without pretending to be someone else." Psychologists who studied the case later described Arnel as a man shaped by survival, not empathy. His entire life had been built around adapting, reading others, and saying what they needed to hear. Dr. Melissa Crane, a behavioral analyst who reviewed the case for the FBI, said, "The tragedy isn't just that he killed someone, it's that he never learned what real affection meant. To him, attention was currency, love was a transaction." For Harold's family, the pain didn't end with the sentencing. In June 2025, his sister Denise returned to Florida with his ashes. Friends gathered by the pier where he used to fish every Sunday morning. The ocean breeze carried his ashes out into the water as she whispered, "He thought he found peace out there. I just hope he has it now." The camera of one friend caught that moment. The same ocean Harold had crossed months earlier, now receiving what remained of him. Thousands of miles away, in a concrete cell in Cebu, Arnel stared through narrow bars at a rain-soaked courtyard, still wearing the same faint smile that had once fooled so many. And that's the haunting contrast. Two men from opposite worlds. One sought love, the other sought escape. One believed kindness could heal. The other believed survival justified deceit. Their paths crossed in a space where need became a weapon, where the digital world blurred the lines between care and control. It's a story that forces us to ask, what does loneliness make people do? How far will someone go just to be seen? And at what point does affection become exploitation? Harold's case reminds us that love, in its purest form, protects. It doesn't pressure. Real love doesn't rush you into silence, secrecy, or shame. It doesn't empty your bank account, and it doesn't end with fear. So if you ever meet someone online who promises forever across oceans, slow down, verify, tell someone. Because the truth is, scams don't start with lies. They start with listening. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Not just to support this channel, but to protect someone else who might be one message away from a mistake they can't take back.